Talking to Logan a little bit on the way. I'm going to try to get through the first 3 chapters of Esther. I'm not always, as good on my time as I think I'm going to be. But this is truly going to be a Bible study. We're going to read through the passage and talk a little bit about it and all that good stuff. But usually I feel like when I pick a passage or when there's a passage that the Lord's laid on my heart, that there are, different passages that I go to, and, there's a lot more that kind of goes into it. I feel like this has really been more of just a storytelling kind of thing. So I feel like tonight I'm going to do more storytelling than I am actually application. There is obviously application in the book of Esther, and we'll talk about some of those things. But Esther is an interesting book. It's a story that has all the intrigue and murder and mystery and backstabbing and craziness of any kind of Hollywood movie that you could possibly see on TV today. Like Jonah, it is a fun story to tell. It is it's easy to remember the facts. It's fun to be able to portray kind of how everything happened, and it is interesting in those. We don't really know who wrote the book. It seems to be obviously a Jew. It seems to have been written after King Ahasuerus or Xerxes passed away, or stopped being the king, because there at in the end of the book. It's kind of written in the past tense. Some people believe that maybe Mordecai wrote it. I don't know. But there's, it doesn't really matter in the big scheme of things. It's the whole book of Esther seems to cover about a 10-year span, a 10-year period of time, from the 480s through the 470s. It kind of happens right in the middle of the book of Ezra. It's a little bit before Nehemiah. It seems to be about 30 years or so before Nehemiah comes back to Jerusalem to repair the wall. One of the very big interesting things about the book of Esther is that there's no mention of God at all in the book of Esther. Doesn't mention anything about prayer in the book of Esther. Doesn't mention anything about really anything that we would typically relate to Bible lessons, Bible stories, passages of the Bible. But it doesn't take very much to see the sovereignty of God in the story, the plan of God, how He is working out the details so that ultimately His people can be saved from the wickedness as we see as it will come up here. There have been a lot of questions about the historical accuracy of the story. I've done a little bit of research in a bunch of different places. Some people say that the Queen Esther, Queen Vashti, neither one of them ever existed. Some people say that Vashti definitely existed, and that, as a matter of fact, we see, at the beginning of the passage there, that she's divorced and she's banished from the kingdom from King Ahasuerus. And then some people say that maybe at the end, when her son starts taking over, Artaxerxes, that she comes back into the kingdom. So there's a big range of opinion out there historically. Obviously, it's in the Bible, so we know that it did happen. There are people that question whether or not it should even be in the Bible. There were a lot of Jews that had issues with it being in the original, in the Old Testament, and because there is no mention of God. But obviously it's there. We believe that we know that God has preserved His Word, and He has, the Bible says that all Scripture is given to us for, doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. So there's definitely applications, definitely things we can learn here. Like I said, you don't have to get very deep into it to see the sovereignty of God, to see how God will use us, whether we're willing or unwilling. God's will be accomplished. What God needs to happen is going to happen. We just need to decide if we're going to be willing to do what God wants us to do and be a part of that story. And so we see throughout the book of Esther God's plan, God's sovereignty. So we're going to read a little bit as we go and then talk about it as well. So we'll pick up there. Like I said, it's a lofty goal, but we're going to try to get through the first 3 chapters. Chapter 1, we'll read 1 through 4 first. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia over 127 provinces, that in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of the reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. Now, we see that he's got this 6-month feast that he is planning. 6-month feast here. It's all the important people from around there are present. It's typically, people believe that this was a feast that was planned. The 6-month party was for creating a war strategy to go into another kingdom and to take over their land. It was an important thing of what his kingdom did. Would take over other countries, tax them, and the rich try to get on even richer. All the important people were there. It happened in Shushan, which was a capital city. It was during the winter, the capital city of the kingdom there, one of 3, and it was in the winter time that they typically went there. But this whole first chapter, as we go through it, is basically just saying how great the king is and how great his kingdom is and how powerful he is, how rich he is, worldly speaking. And so we'll continue here. We'll read verses 5 through 9. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, and blue hangings fastened with cords of the linen and purple of silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble, and they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So after the 6-month party wasn't good enough, now he's going to have another 1 week long party. Now this 1 week long party would be for everybody there in Shushan, all the people there around the palace. And it says that nobody was compelled to drink, but obviously there was lots of drinking going on. And once again, these verses are really just stressing. I mean, we don't really care today, the gold, the purple, the silver, he had all these nice cups, and not only did he have the nice gold cups, but they were all different nice gold cups. And just on and on and on about his material wealth and the importance that he placed on that material wealth. And so we're just really setting the context for who this king is. He's proud. He's stuck in himself. He thinks he's great. The kings of Persia and Media at that time, they were considered to be gods. They claimed a lot of deity in their own name. So he really enjoyed being who he was, and he wanted everyone to know how great that he was. And then there in verse 9 you see where Vashti, who his queen, had made a feast for the women in a separate part of the royal house, which was also belonged to the king. Verse 10, we'll read down through 12. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abgatha, Zethar, and Carcass. Phil would love that name, Carcass. the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned within him. Now, we've all heard stories, some from the Bible and in our normal lives, that started out with someone saying, I was drinking, or I was drunk, or something along those lines, and nothing ever good comes after that statement, does it? Ever. Nothing ever good. I was drinking one night and the cure for cancer just came to my mind. I was drinking one night and I figured out the problem for world hunger. Nothing good coming out of mass amount of alcohol consumption, and the Bible is very clear that it's a bad idea. And here we see how bad of an idea it was. So it starts out with the king making a bad decision. Now Vashti was beautiful. He was proud of his wife. There are many of us that have beautiful wives that are proud of our beautiful wives, right? But we wouldn't, because we have better judgment than he does, and to obviously a whole different time frame, call for our wife to show off in front of all of our friends about how beautiful she was, especially in the context of that country in that time. Women were to remain covered. It wasn't something that was normal, and it certainly wasn't good for anyone. The king was making a bad decision. Vashti didn't want to have anything to do with it. So she turns the king down. She says no. Well, as we know, historically, kings don't like to be told no, right? And Ahasuerus really didn't like to be told no. We had just covered from the whole first part of that chapter about how great he was, how powerful he was, all the gold, fine linens, purples, blues, whites, reds, all this stuff. He's great. Now he can't even control his own queen. Can't even control his own wife in his own house. So it doesn't go well for him. He's not happy. He's very wroth. And we'll see here in verses 10 through 12 what he decides. Or 13 through 15, sorry. Then the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. And the next unto him was Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Maries, Marsna, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat the first in the kingdom. What shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to law, because she hath not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to the princes and to all the people that are in the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. The king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. We'll go ahead. We'll read down through verse 20. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes which have heard of the deed of the queen, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. So we have these wise men, in quotes, telling the king, what he should be done, what should be done with the queen's disobedience. And they reason within themselves. Obviously, they had been drinking a lot too, because they're making bad decisions as well. What you need to do is you need to get rid of her. You need to banish her. And you need to banish her for this reason, because she disobeyed you, and then when everyone else in your vast 127 provinces, all the way from Egypt up into India, over past modern-day Iran, big area, all the women are going to go crazy. All the women are going to ignore their husbands. All the women are going to rebel. You're going to have utter and complete chaos on your hands, King. This is horrible. You got to nip this in the bud. As Barney Fife would say, you got to nip it. Craziness. Now, the law that King Ahasuerus was going to put his ring to said that Vashti could no longer come before the king, and it says that it cannot be altered. As a deity, as a, that the king made himself, when he created a law, when he made a law, it couldn't be revoked forever. It was the law of the land, and that was the way it was. It couldn't be changed. It couldn't be altered. Now, we learn later that you can create a new law if you want that would kind of go against the previous law. But once this law is made, it's made. Nothing can be done about it. It can't be changed. And so they didn't want Vashti to inspire all the women of the provinces to create chaos. Now, the Bible doesn't really give any moral judgment on what Vashti did here, right? Did she do right? So this is my thing, all right? As we go through this book, the Bible doesn't give a lot of moral, this person did right, this person did wrong, on several different things that we're going to talk about. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. Obviously, we all have our own opinions. I certainly do. But did Vashti do right in this circumstance? Does anybody have any thoughts on it? Anybody want to say one way or the other? I've already told you there's no right or wrong answer. I don't like answering questions from my seat when there's a right or wrong answer, because if it's wrong, then, I should have known better. No men are going to answer the question. Well, no men in here are stupid enough to make that kind of decree, right? I don't know. She disobeyed her husband. She disobeyed the king. She obviously disobeyed him out of pride, right? Personal pride. But was it negative personal pride? Or was it positive personal pride? I've heard lessons talk about how Vashti was an empowered woman. She did the right thing. She shouldn't have gone before the king like that he was doing wrong. And in some ways, she was saving him embarrassment because he was doing something that he shouldn't do. I don't know. Still nothing? Huh? There's no right or wrong answer. I don't know. Did she do right? Did she do wrong? Now, I can't really say one way or the other. The Bible doesn't tell us that she was in the right spirit. The Bible doesn't say that she was in the wrong spirit. And throughout the Bible, we see circumstances like this where we don't really know the motivations of the person making the decisions. Sometimes we put our own opinions on it because it's easier to tell that story, and it's easier to work it into whatever we want to be true. I don't really know if she did right or wrong here. I do know that this is creating an opening for Esther to walk through the door. So, I can see the hand of God in it. I don't know. Did she do right? Did she do wrong? Doesn't matter, right?
God didn't tell us. It
Doesn't matter. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. She did what she did. The Bible doesn't tell us if it was right or if it was wrong. So, I don't know. You can think on those things. All my questions are kind of like that, though, just to go ahead and give you fair warning. But no matter the cause, like I said, we definitely see the hand of God working in this situation. Because the Jews, his people, are going to be preserved. Right? He has a plan. So, God's will is going to be accomplished. Now, did we read all the rest of the chapter, or we just read through 20? Just through 20. All right. So, we'll read the last two verses there quickly. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan, for he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the written thereof, to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. So, he sends the decree out. He's made the decision. Vashti's out. Nothing can be done about it now because his word is law. All right, first 4 verses in chapter 2. Now, in chapter 2 here is where we discover Esther. This is where Esther enters into the story. The first chapter, purely just about how great the king is in his own mind, how important he is in the material world at that time, and that's really all we've established, and that's what we got going. So, verses 1 through 4. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Hegi, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them. And let the maiden which pleaseth the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. So, at some point, the king starts getting mad, or starts getting upset, starts getting sad. Historically speaking, what I found is people tend to believe that he just lost a great battle, and that's kind of what brought up his sorrow. And he thought of his wife, and he thought about what she had done, and he thought about the decree that had been made about her. And we might see a little bit of regret here, right? Maybe I didn't handle this the best way. But before he can really get into the regret, his wise men come up with a plan. They don't want the king to be upset because they're the ones that came up with the law, right? So they think, well, maybe if he gets mad and remembers Vashti, and he'll blame it on us for getting rid of her. So they come up with a plan for that reason, and it's just good to please the king. So they're trying to make the king happy. They come up with something to cheer him up. And they make a plan to go out and find all the most beautiful virgins and have a contest to see which one of them makes the king the most happy, and they are going to crown her as the new queen. Now, the queen is a title that she would have, but it's not like we think of a queen today. She wasn't really going to be getting a lot of authority in this situation, but it was something that pleased the king, so he decides, let's go for it. Now let's read verses 5 through 7. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah king of Judah when Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So now we get introduced to Hadassah. Hadassah is her Jewish name. That's the name that she was given as a Jew. It means myrtle. It's like a type of tree, and I've seen where they've taken it to compassion. So her name meaning compassion. And then her Persian name was Esther, which means star. So she's finally introduced to the story. She is the person that the book is named after, obviously. She's very important. She has some big roles in this plan of the Lord. And she enters in, she's an orphan. Her parents have both died. She's obviously displaced from her home country. Now, this had happened not in her lifetime, so she had only known Shushan as a place to live. But she was an outcast. She wasn't part of that, society there in Persia. She was a Jewess. She was, obviously, she was an orphan. She had been adopted by her cousin Mordecai. And that's our introduction to Esther. Let's read verses 8 and 9. So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. I've pronounced that 3 different ways, I think. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens which were meet to be given her out of the king's house, and he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of women. So here we see that Esther was a beautiful person. Not only was she a beautiful person on the outward, but evidently she was a very good person to get along with, right? We've all known people that were beautiful in our life that we couldn't stand because they either had no personality or they were mean or whatever. Esther wasn't like that. She was beautiful on the inside and on the out. She caught favor with everybody that she came in contact with. So she comes to this house here, to the contest, and she finds great favor with this guy. He really likes her. He gives her 7 handmaids. He gives her everything for her purification, for this first beauty part of the portion of the arrangement here. Verses 10 and 11. Esther had not showed her people, nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the woman's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. So Mordecai tells Esther to not tell anyone that she's a Jew. And he came in and he checked on her every day, right? So, another question. Can you guess what my question is? Was Esther right in not telling people she was a Jew? She was obeying Mordecai, certainly. Now that's true. So she's obeying the person that is the rule over her. We don't really know how old Esther is here either. We assume that she's an older teenager, maybe early 20s, somewhere in there. But we don't really know how old she was. So, taking it a step further then, was Mordecai right in telling Esther to not tell people she was a Jew?
Well, if as far as nationality and race, he was probably wise in telling her not to let people know because he knew there were prejudices against the Jews.
So Mordecai knew that, right, Mordecai knew that there was prejudices against the Jews. He had been, he obviously has some position in the government here. We see as we go further into the story. He knew that as a religion, and not even as a religion, but as a nationality, Jews were looked down upon in many cases. They were operating freely here. They had positions. They had businesses, but certainly still there was there could be some tension there. So he probably showed some wisdom in telling her. He didn't tell her to lie, right? He didn't say, don't tell anybody you're a Jew. He said, don't mention that you're a Jew. So, we don't have any indication that they said, what nationality are you? She was born there. He had lived there his whole life, most likely. So the people probably just assumed she was Persian. Which brings me to another question. Were these practicing Jews in their religious side of things? I don't know, once again. The people didn't know she was a Jew. The people didn't really, I don't think the people knew at this point that Mordecai was a Jew. Later we know that Mordecai is outed as a Jew because he tells the people that he was a Jew. But I don't know. So just an interesting kind of thing. Once again, the Bible doesn't place any morality on it. Not volunteering your nationality isn't necessarily lying. I don't think she did anything wrong in doing this. Maybe he was worried about her being mistreated. Maybe he was worried about her being killed. Maybe he was worried about his own position in the government and it coming out. Maybe he knew that if it was outed that she was a Jew, that she wouldn't win the contest and she couldn't become the queen. I don't know. Once again, the Bible doesn't really put any yes or no to it. It's just an interesting kind of question. I'm getting into their mindset on what was going on there. So I don't know. But I don't tend to think there was anything really wrong with that. We'll read verses 12 through 14 now, kind of giving a description of the contest. Now, when every maid's turn was come to go in to King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months, according to the manner of the women, for so were the days of their purifications accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Then thus came every maiden unto the king, whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women to the custody of Shaashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. So here we have a description of the contest. Each woman was to go through a year-long beauty regime, skin softeners, perfumes, whatever. A whole year of beautification before she could even see the king one time. So, once again, we see the absurdity of King Ahasuerus. We see the pride that he has and that he wouldn't even look at one of these already identified as beautiful women until they had gone through this year-long purification process. And then after that, after they went through that, they got to go in and spend the night with the king. And then after that, she was sent to another woman's house, or to another house of the women, which is now the concubines. So she was a fair virgin. She comes in, she has a one night stand with the king, and then she gets kicked back out to the concubine house. And unless the king really likes her, and he says, I want the one called Esther to come back and see me again. So he's got to remember her name and like her enough that he wants to call her back. So this is the description of the contest that is going down here. Verses 15 through 20. Now in the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king. She required nothing but what Haggai, that's a tough one for me, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed, and Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast, and he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, when Mordecai sat in the king's gate, Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. So here we see it's Esther's turn. She only takes with her to the king's house what the man that was taking care of her told her to take. So she takes what he gives her, and he goes in. She goes in. She finds favor with the king. He loves her. He loves her more than all the other women that he's met with, that he's seen, that he's been with, and he decides, this is her. This is the one that I'm going to make the new queen. And so she becomes the new queen. He crowns her. She takes Vashti's place Now, this has been 4 years now from the original kind of when we first started the book of Esther. The last year or so, Esther has been locked up in a house, going through a beauty regime, beauty whatever, for a whole year. Probably bored out of her skull, right? Probably, this isn't a great thing for Esther. We read all that, we've talked about all that in 20, 25 minutes, whatever, and I often have this conversation when I'm reading the Bible. It seems quick to us, but put yourself in their shoes. Think about the time frame that has been consumed here, and how, when we're looking at it, it seems like it's gone pretty quick and things are going in Esther's favor, but this isn't a positive experience for her. I mean, imagine in your own shoes if you were, a young teenage girl, you were brought in to be a part of this sick king that thinks he's great, thinks he's a deity, thinks he's wonderful, has all this riches, has all these things going on, to be a sick pawn in his game. I mean, this isn't something that Esther is enjoying. This isn't something that's good for Esther as a human being. This isn't something that that she enjoys in any way. But the Bible said that also that he made a release to the provinces, so that was probably some kind of tax break or release of prisoners or whatever. It was a special occasion. He had a big party for Esther, had a feast. Everything was going well. It was special in the king's mind. And then in verse 19 we see some time had elapsed there, and now Mordecai is part of the government office. It kind of seems like maybe he was in the court system there, sitting in the king's door. And it establishes that Esther still hadn't told anyone about her heritage. Which brings me to my next question. Should Esther have taken part in the contest? Bible doesn't really say, one way or the other. You can say she didn't have a choice, which I could see. But we always have a choice, right? You might not like the consequences of the choice that you make. She may have been killed. She may have been banished with Vashti. I don't know. But should she have participated in this sick game? Should she allowed herself to be a part of it? I don't know. I have a hard time placing any blame on Esther in this situation. It appears that she was a young girl. She was doing the best that she could to survive. Mordecai, same thing, as her parent, as her father figure. Should he have let her take place in this contest? I mean, I can see the survival instinct side of it, just wanting to get through this. I don't know. It's mind-boggling sometimes to think about. But one thing that I know for sure, and you see it throughout this book, once again, what's happening? God's putting her in the place she needs to be in. God has a plan. Now, we don't know if we're still working on God's perfect will of a plan here. Maybe some people have made some bad decisions. Maybe they haven't. Maybe we've made some bad decisions, right? We've all made bad decisions, right? We can all admit that. And the key is, I think, to this entire part of the story, and really the whole story, is no matter how you got to where you are, no matter what's happened back there, you're here now, and God has you here. And He has something that you can do to accomplish His plan. You don't know what happened back there. I don't know. Maybe Vashti made a bad decision. Maybe she should have just done what she was told, in which case Esther would have never been queen. Maybe Mordecai shouldn't have told Esther not to hide her Jewishness, and maybe she just would have never been part of the process. I don't know. God could have worked through that in a way that would have been miraculous and great. But the key isn't, like we said, it doesn't matter, right? The key isn't what happened. It was that when it happens, are we willing to do what God wants us to do now? Are we willing to get in on God's plan? Because He has a plan. He wants us to be part of that plan. We haven't got to Esther 4, and we're definitely not tonight. At this point, we're not even going to get through 3. But God has a plan, and in chapter 4, we're going to read that verse in just a minute that I kind of think sums up the entire book of Esther in many ways, a lot of the Bible. But let's go ahead and read 21 through 23 there in chapter 2, and we'll close out this portion. In those days, make sure I'm right. Yeah, 21. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth and sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So here we have the close out to chapter 2. Mordecai is going about his business, as doing his job there in the king's gate. He hears a couple of the chamberlains that are mad at King Ahasuerus. Probably something he did, drinking and making bad decisions, thinking that he was great, wanting to show off his wealth and his opulence. Whatever set them off, they were mad at him. They wanted to lay hands on him. They wanted to kill him. Mordecai heard it. He got the news to Esther, who told the king about Mordecai's overhearing it, gave Mordecai the credit for it, and the king was saved. When they figured it out, they did their investigation. Those guys were killed. And it was written in the Chronicles. Now, obviously, for those of us that have heard the story, we know those Chronicles play an important part later. But for just this part of it, putting yourself in Mordecai's position, he doesn't know what happened with it. Right? He knows that the plot didn't work, but he doesn't know that he got any credit for it. He doesn't know that anyone is even aware of his name. He gave the information to Esther, who gave it to the king. It was written in the book. And we'll obviously come back to that later. It becomes an important role. And we'll go ahead and we'll stop there in chapter 2, because chapter 3 has a lot in it as well. But I want to flip over to chapter 4 real quick, 4:14. And this is the end of verse 14 there. And this is the most important thing for us to remember, I think, from the book of Esther. And that is this part that I'm sure we all know and we have all heard. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And this is advice that Mordecai gives to Esther here in the coming up of the story. And it's an important role in but it's the overall theme for Esther, and it's what I want to make sure we think about tonight. Who knows? Maybe the Lord has you where you are right now for this reason. Now, I don't know what the reason is, because we all have phases where we go through really bad stuff. Right? Our own personal health, the health of a loved one, the loss of a loved one, job loss, whatever the case may be. We all go through bad situations. But who knows? Maybe the Lord has you in that situation for a reason. And we all know that He does. And we all know that He has a plan for us. Doesn't matter what got us to where we are now. Guilt keeps a lot of people from serving the Lord. Well, I can't do this because of something I did 10 years ago, or something I did last week, or 10 minutes ago. It's an excuse that a lot of people use. I can't invite that person to church because they saw me do this at work last week. I can't. Doesn't matter what got you to where you are, God still wants to use you. Are you willing to let Him work through you to do what He needs to accomplish? In this case, It's save the Jewish race in this kingdom. Could be big. Are you willing to get in on it? Are you willing to let the Lord work through you? And we'll pick up with chapter 3 next week. Let's pray. Dear Father, Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time, Lord. Just pray that you'd be with each and every one of us as we study your word, that we would get what you would have for us in your word, Lord, that we would be open and receptive to it, that we would know that you do have a plan for us, and that no matter what we've done in the past, no matter where we are in our life, that you have a plan for us and that we can be used if we are willing, Lord. Just pray that you be with us as we go out the rest of the week. Keep us safe and bring us back at the point of time on Sunday. Lord, we thank you and ask all these things in your name. Amen.